For years, Texas was sold as the promised land of American real estate. Low taxes, business-friendly policies, a relentless flood of new residents pouring in from California, New York, Illinois, companies relocating headquarters, remote workers chasing affordability, investors chasing returns. The story was simple. Texas grows, Texas wins. Prices only go up. And for a while, it worked. From 2020 to 2022, some Texas cities posted price appreciation that rivaled the hottest markets in the country. Austin was being compared to San Francisco. Frisco and Plano were minting millionaires on paper. Houston and San Antonio were absorbing residents faster than they could build neighborhoods. It felt like the party would never end. But here's the thing about real estate cycles. They always end. Every run-up carries the seeds of its own correction. And in 2026, those seeds have sprouted. Inventory is climbing. Days on market are stretching. Price cuts are showing up on listings that would have attracted bidding wars just 2 years ago. Builders are offering incentives. Sellers are getting nervous. And investors are quietly reassessing. This isn't a crash. This isn't 2008. Lending standards are tighter and foreclosures remain relatively contained. But make no mistake, Texas is in a correction phase. And some cities are feeling it far more sharply than others. Today, we're counting down the 10 Texas cities facing the most significant real estate slowdowns right now. We'll look at what drove their booms, what's driving their corrections, and what buyers, sellers, and investors need to understand going into the back half of 2026. Stay with me through number 1, because the numbers there are genuinely staggering. Let's get into it. Kicking off our list at number 10 is El Paso. Now, El Paso was never the flashy darling of the Texas boom. It didn't make the national headlines the way Austin did. It didn't attract the wave of tech workers or venture capital money. But that's actually what made it appealing. It was steady, affordable, and relatively insulated from the speculative frenzy happening in other parts of the state. That stability, however, is now being tested. Over the past year, active listings in El Paso have climbed noticeably while sales volume has cooled. Homes that used to move in days are now sitting on the market for weeks, and sellers who anchored their expectations to 2022 pricing, the peak of the frenzy, are being forced to come back down to earth. Local MLS data shows price reductions becoming increasingly common, especially in entry-level neighborhoods where buyers have simply hit the affordability ceiling. When mortgage rates are elevated and incomes haven't kept pace with where prices ran to, demand gets squeezed. That's what's happening in El Paso right now. The market isn't crashing, but the momentum that carried it through the pandemic years has clearly reversed. For buyers, that's actually good news. For sellers who bought near the top expecting quick appreciation, it's a different story entirely. At number 9, we move to the Gulf Coast, Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi had a very specific tailwind during the boom years. Remote work migration brought new residents who wanted coastal lifestyle at a fraction of what beach markets in Florida or California cost. And investors piled into short-term rentals, betting that tourism demand would keep Airbnb occupancy rates high indefinitely. Both of those tailwinds have faded. Demand from remote workers has cooled as companies have pulled employees back to offices in larger metros. And the short-term rental market has softened, partly due to weaker tourism numbers, but also because insurance costs along the Gulf Coast have surged dramatically. When your insurance bill for a coastal property doubles or triples, the math on a short-term rental investment stops working. Inventory has expanded faster than buyer demand can absorb it. Price growth has stalled, and in some submarkets, median sale prices have begun slipping on a year-over-year basis. Investors who assumed coastal markets were a one-way bet are discovering what anyone who has lived through a real estate cycle already knows. Coastal volatility cuts both ways. Number 8 is Killeen, and this one tells a very specific story about what happens when investor demand outruns fundamentals. Killeen's housing market is heavily influenced by Fort Hood, now officially named Fort Cavazos, one of the largest military installations in the United States. That military presence creates a steady baseline of housing demand, which made Killeen attractive to investors during the boom years. The thinking was simple: soldiers always need housing, so rental income is reliable. Investors bought aggressively. Landlords accumulated single-family rentals, and for a while, the strategy worked, but rental demand has softened. Vacancies are rising. And when you have a market where investors make up a disproportionate share of buyers, a slowdown doesn't happen gradually, it accelerates. Investors don't have the emotional attachment that owner-occupants do. When the numbers stop working, they start selling. Homes are taking longer to close. Single-family rental listings have increased, and the pressure on prices is building. Killeen is a cautionary tale about what happens when speculative investment runs ahead of genuine end-user demand. At number 7, Fort Worth. Fort Worth has long lived in the shadow of Dallas, and honestly, that underdog status worked in its favor during the pandemic boom. While Dallas was getting all the attention, Fort Worth quietly became one of the fastest growing suburban markets in the country. Builders moved aggressively into the area, expanding master planned communities and new subdivisions at a pace that matched the incoming demand for a while. The problem is that builders kept building even as demand began to slow, and now the market is sitting with inventory levels well above pre-2020 norms. Price growth has flattened. Absorption rates, meaning how quickly new homes are being sold, have slowed significantly, and builders are now offering incentives to move product, rate buydowns, closing cost credits, free upgrades. Here's the important thing to understand about builder incentives. They are not a sign of a healthy market. When a builder offers to buy down your mortgage rate by 2 points or covers your closing costs, what they're really telling you is that their homes are not selling at the listed price without help. That is the definition of a market under pressure. Fort Worth isn't collapsing, but the aggressive suburban expansion of the last few years has created a supply overhang that will take time to work through. Number 6 brings us to the largest city in Texas, Houston. Houston is one of the most economically diverse metros in the country. Energy, healthcare, aerospace, trade. The city's economy doesn't rely on a single industry, which has historically made it more resilient than markets that are dependent on one sector. And that diversification will likely protect Houston from a severe correction. But resilience doesn't mean immunity. Higher interest rates have meaningfully reduced purchasing power across the Houston metro. Year-over-year price growth, which was running hot through 2022, has softened dramatically. In several outer ring suburbs, areas like Katy, Sugar Land, and parts of Cypress, listings have surged while pending sales have declined. Homes that attracted multiple offers 18 months ago are now sitting on the market for weeks, sometimes months. Sellers are being forced to adjust their expectations. The days of list at Friday, offers due Sunday are over in most Houston submarkets. Houston may avoid the sharper corrections we're seeing elsewhere on this list, but normalization is unmistakable, and for a market that had become accustomed to frictionless sales and rising prices, that adjustment is jarring. Halfway through our list, and we're at number 5. San Antonio. San Antonio's story in 2026 is really 2 stories happening simultaneously. One in multifamily, one in single family, and both are telling the same underlying message. On the multifamily side, San Antonio saw one of the most aggressive apartment construction waves in the entire state over the last 3 years. Developers, responding to rising rents and strong demand signals, flooded the market with new units. The supply response was enormous, but demand didn't keep up, and now multifamily vacancy rates have risen sharply. Landlords are offering concessions that were unthinkable 2 years ago. A month of free rent, waived application fees, gift cards, flexible lease terms. When landlords are competing aggressively for tenants, it tells you that supply has outrun demand, and eventually that dynamic pressures rents downward, which in turn affects property values. On the single-family side, resale inventory has expanded noticeably. Builders who once commanded bidding wars are now quietly trimming prices. The urgency that defined the 2021 and 2022 buying environment has evaporated. San Antonio remains a compelling long-term market. Its military presence, tourism economy, and relatively affordable price base give it structural support, but 2026 is a year of painful recalibration, and anyone who bought at the peak expecting quick appreciation is feeling that pain right now. At number 4, Plano. Plano is one of the wealthiest cities in Texas, and its housing market reflects that. Corporate headquarters, high-income households, excellent school districts. Plano has a profile that most suburban markets would envy, but even premium markets have limits. The corporate relocation wave that fueled Plano's growth has slowed. Companies that had announced Texas moves have in some cases reversed course or scaled back, and the high-income buyers who drove demand in Plano are not immune to higher mortgage rates, $1. 5 million home with a 7% mortgage requires a very different income calculation than the same home financed at 3%. Listings have accumulated. The luxury segment, homes above $800,000, is seeing increased negotiation. Days on market are extending. Sellers who anchored to 2022 comparable sales are being told by their agents that the market simply won't support those numbers anymore. What's happening in Plano is a reminder that the correction isn't limited to entry-level or working-class markets. When mortgage rates squeeze affordability at every price point, even affluent buyers pull back. Gravity eventually reasserts itself. Number 3. Frisco. If Plano is the established wealth market of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Frisco is its younger, faster-growing cousin. Over the last decade, Frisco became one of the fastest-growing cities in the entire United States. Master planned communities expanded at record pace. National home builders staked out massive land positions. Corporate campuses followed the rooftops. The PGA of America moved its headquarters there. Frisco was a poster child for the Texas growth story. And for a while, the numbers justified the hype, but the story has changed. Inventory has climbed substantially from the lows of the pandemic frenzy. Days on market are rising. Price reductions are increasingly visible. You can see them in real time on Zillow and Redfin, properties that have been cut once, twice, sometimes 3 times. Investors who poured into Frisco assuming that tech-driven migration would continue indefinitely are rethinking their exposure. Some are quietly listing properties they had planned to hold long-term. And when investor sellers and organic sellers are both adding to inventory simultaneously, the supply picture worsens quickly. Frisco will almost certainly remain a strong market over a longer time horizon. The fundamentals, income levels, school quality, corporate presence are real, but anyone who bought between 2021 and early 2023 expecting to refinance into appreciation gains within a couple of years is finding themselves in a much more complicated position than they anticipated. At number 2, the city that many assumed would be the most protected, Dallas. Dallas is a powerhouse. There's no other word for it. It is one of the premier business cities in America. It has attracted Fortune 500 relocations, global financial firms, a growing tech sector, and a population that has expanded dramatically over the last decade. And yet, the data is shifting. Recent market reports show softening year-over-year pricing in several Dallas zip codes. Not dramatic declines, but the direction has changed. Active listings are up significantly compared to the frenzy years of 2021 and 2022. Sellers are offering concessions more frequently, covering closing costs, offering repair credits, accepting contingencies they would have laughed at 2 years ago. Corporate buyers, institutional investors who were snapping up single-family homes as rental properties, have sharply reduced their acquisition activity. When institutional money pulls back, it removes a significant source of demand from the market. The luxury condo market downtown has also cooled. New towers that were pre-selling at record prices are now seeing slower absorption. Let me be clear, Dallas is not in freefall. The economic engine is still running, but the idea that Dallas was somehow immune to the broader correction affecting Texas real estate has been proven wrong. It is cooling, and it is cooling faster than many analysts predicted heading into 2026. And here we are, number 1, Austin. There was no market in Texas, and arguably no market in America, one that embodied the pandemic-era real estate frenzy more completely than Austin. Think about what happened here. Between 2020 and 2022, Austin home prices increased at one of the fastest rates ever recorded for a major U.S. metro. Homes were going under contract within hours of listing. Buyers were waiving inspections, waiving appraisals, writing personal letters to sellers. Cash offers were flooding in from California buyers who saw Austin prices as cheap compared to where they were coming from. Tech workers from Google, Apple, Tesla, Oracle, companies that had either relocated to Austin or expanded massively there, were buying homes aggressively, often sight unseen. Developers responded by building relentlessly. Apartment towers went up across the urban core. New subdivisions pushed into the hill country surrounding the city. Everyone, it seemed, was betting that Austin would become the next great American tech hub, the San Francisco of the South, and that prices would continue climbing indefinitely. And then, it stopped. Today, Austin is facing one of the sharpest corrections in the state. Inventory has surged compared to the peak frenzy levels. The months of supply figure, yet a key measure of market balance, has moved from extreme seller's market territory to something approaching a balanced or even buyer-friendly market in certain segments. Price reductions are widespread. In some segments and some zip codes, values are down meaningfully, double digits in percentage terms, from their 2022 highs. Sellers who bought at the peak are, in some cases, facing the uncomfortable reality that they are underwater or close to it. The multifamily situation is particularly striking. Austin delivered an enormous wave of new apartment supply over the last 2 years, and absorption has not kept pace. Vacancy rates have risen sharply. Landlords are offering aggressive concessions. Rents, which spiked dramatically during the boom, have come back down considerably. In some submarkets, renters are in the strongest negotiating position they have been in years. Builders are offering incentives that would have been unthinkable at the peak, buying down mortgage rates by 2 or 3 points, covering closing costs, slashing base prices on spec homes. Now, does this mean Austin is broken? No. The long-term case for Austin is still compelling. The University of Texas anchor, the live music and culture scene, the political and entrepreneurial energy of the city, the continued presence of major employers. These things don't disappear because the housing market corrects. But the correction is real, it is significant, and it is a direct consequence of what happens when a market rises too far, too fast, driven by speculation and momentum rather than sustainable underlying demand. The unwind of those excesses is now playing out in real time. So what does all of this mean? Across all 10 cities on this list, the pattern is consistent. Inventory up, days on market rising, price cuts spreading, seller leverage declining, buyer leverage returning, quietly but unmistakably. Let me say again what this is not. This is not 2008. The subprime lending catastrophe that triggered that crash was a fundamentally different animal. Today's borrowers are generally better qualified. Lending standards are significantly tighter. Foreclosure rates, while ticking up, remain well below crisis-era levels. What this is a classic correction following one of the most aggressive housing expansions in modern American history. Markets that ran too far, too fast, are now finding their equilibrium, and that process takes time, and it involves pain for those who bought at the peak, expecting appreciation to continue. For buyers, this environment is actually an opportunity. Leverage is returning, sellers are negotiating, incentives are available. If you have been priced out or sitting on the sidelines waiting for conditions to improve, the conditions are improving. For sellers, the message is clear. Pricing realistically is no longer optional. The days of testing the market with an aspirational number and waiting for a full price offer are over. The market will tell you what your home is worth, and in 2026, that number is lower than it was in 2022. For investors, this is a reminder that no market, and not even Texas, is exempt from cycles. Due diligence, conservative underwriting, and realistic exit assumptions matter. They always have. The last few years just made it easy to forget that. Texas remains one of the most compelling long-term real estate markets in the country. The population growth story, the business environment, the relative affordability compared to coastal metros, those fundamentals are intact. But right now in 2026, the market is humbling, and paying attention to that reality is the first step toward making smart decisions inside it. If you found this analysis useful, hit subscribe for more data-driven real estate breakdowns, and drop a comment below. And which Texas city do you think carries the most risk over the next 12 months? I read every single one. See you in the next one.